I have to be interested in it. And so one of the things that really attracted me to the Zettelkasten system is follow your interests. Like if you're not interested in something, put it down and do something else.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gumroad podcast. I'm your host, Justin Michaelet, a senior writer at Gumroad, where I deconstruct the tactics, strategies, and processes of top creators. Each week on the podcast, I interview creators and digital entrepreneurs who are at the top of their field. On this week's episode, I interviewed professional marketer and daily creator Evs Chapman. Ev and I talked about personal knowledge management, the practice, mindset, and workflows of creating daily on the internet, and building products to do it. This was an outstanding and fun conversation. Enjoy. Our guest on the podcast today is Evs Chapman. Ev, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. You've burst onto the scene on Twitter, and we had a great Twitter Spaces conversation. So we figured we'd carry it forward on the podcast, get a permanent record of it, share it around even more broadly. You're known for daily creating on the internet and the mindset of that and the process that you use, and you're sharing that and you're productizing it, in fact, on Gumroad. And that's been exciting to see. So I would love to talk to you about that topic and a few other topics. In fact, you write about personal knowledge management a lot and sort of the corollary aspects of that, note-taking, for example, productivity, with the exception of hustle culture and all of that. So I figured since we had such an in-depth conversation on that topic in our first Twitter Spaces, why not take that to the next level?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's funny because I'm not sure I would be kind of as prolific or even kind of have got to this stage if I didn't discover kind of really like personal knowledge management, starting to really like get my thoughts together, that kind of thing. Because I read the book, How to Take Smart Notes, maybe only a year ago, like August 2020. And that really just set me on a path, I think, to then really start to organize, what I read, how I consume things, how I take notes, that kind of thing. So, and then now, that's been able to then kind of push me into this creative journey. Because once you start to, I think once you start to write things down and start to think about things, you automatically want to then kind of put that out. You can't just keep thinking things. You have to actually put that out into the world.
Yeah, we've talked about commonplacing, which stretches back 500 years, all the way to the times of Erasmus in the 16th century. And he has described that back in the day as having a magical effect on people, turning an ordinary reader into a prolific thinker, writer, and creator.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know that what you do these days, you described yourself once you started to take on this practice, I would call it. Yep. It turned you instantly from a 10-year, 1 decade, quote unquote, self-described cute wannabe creator to a person who actually creates things online. So talk to me about what you first started to do, how you broke through that barrier, and perhaps describe some of your system that you've developed over time.
Yeah, so I think I wrote to try and understand the Zettelkasten system that is described in Smart Notes is sometimes complicated. And when you first read the book, you're like, what? Like, what is all these notes? And so actually the first note that I wrote kind of in my system is how to write a permanent note. Because I was like, I'm just not getting it. Like, I don't understand. And so anyway, then I reread the book and that kind of thing. But I think from there, I really just created a system, and I was already using Notion, and I was a Notion ambassador. And so I think, people look at my system now and then they're like, oh my gosh, like this is like the most like crazy developed system. But at the time it was like just notes, like it's just a page of notes. And then as you go, you evolve, and systems should evolve over time. And so I kind of, I feel like as I do the work, the systems evolve. And I think that's how it should be, in that when you're like, sometimes I can like go down the rabbit holes of like, how are other people doing this? And that's helpful. But I think it's not until you actually get in and do things for yourself that you really discover what the system, or you discover frictions in your system and you're like, okay, how can I solve that? And so that's kind of how my mind has evolved over time. And so it kind of went from a lot of consuming. So I consume a lot of content, articles, books, videos, podcasts, all of that. And all of that goes into my system. And then it works its way through. Like, so things get parked in the system and then they move into up next, which is where I kind of then consume content. I take notes. I'm really against highlighting. I don't use Readwise. I'm like I just have these rules for myself. And, but it helps me to think. Like I highlighted and, you know, underlined things in books for years and I don't remember any of it until I actually started to, like, it's, people say to me, well, it sounds like a lot of work. I'm like, yeah, it is. It's the work. Like, it's the work of knowledge. It's the work of getting knowledge and building your kind of library of knowledge. And so from there, then everything in my kind of knowledge system, I was just processing notes this morning and I'm like, oh, that would make a great essay idea, or that would make a great thread. And it's just as you're learning, you're like, yeah, okay, I've got this idea. I'm going to, get that out into the world. So that's kind of how it works. Sometimes it works the other way, like in that I have an idea that I write and then I've been putting that back into my knowledge system. But
You mean the output becomes a new input?
yes. So I write the essay first and then I think, oh, I better actually include that in my, my notes.
Well, for those who aren't familiar, and you published recently about this, I don't think it's your original idea per se, but you mentioned the word permanent note, and that is one of three different kinds that you've described. It's really the second kind. The first is a literature note, the second's a permanent note, and then a sequence note. Can you just describe the distinction between those three?
Yeah, and I think I might have made up sequence note, but it I think it's how anything happens is that I synthesize this into my own way. So I don't use fleeting notes at all. So if that's another part of the Zettelkasten, and I just don't use it. As I take notes, I take literature notes, they're notes in my own handwriting, that kind of thing. They then get turned into these permanent notes in my Zettelkasten. And a permanent note for me is like, and I've actually in my head started calling it a cluster note because it's like a cluster of ideas for me. So if you think originally the Zettelkasten is like a real slip box of 3x5 notes. So in my head, that's how I picture it. And so the permanent note is like a front note that kind of declares something. So how to write permanent notes, for instance, that's one of my permanent notes. It sits at the front. And then I have a whole lot of sequence notes, which are also permanent notes, but just sit behind it. And so part of that is like how to write a permanent note title. So use declarative statements, ask questions. And so I kind of keep it in sequence. And then when I'm getting a new piece of information, I then find where that fits in the sequence. And so it's probably a little more organized than maybe the original intent, but then I can link it out to other places and there's a whole lot of linking that happens as well. But that's kind of how I do it. I have literature notes, permanent notes, which are like clusters of big ideas, and then sequence notes in those clusters.
And all of that taken together, you would regard as your permanent thought library. And I believe you talked about how Ryan Holiday has written about that and how you consumed that and sort of turned that into action.
And I've been playing around with calling it my thought lab. So rather than Zettelkasten, because I don't know, I just like to name things, and I just like like it's kind of my experiment in thought.
I understand that you caused a brush fire of some kind. And I know you're tuning in from Sydney, Australia, so maybe that's
Yes.
not the appropriate metaphor to bring up. And it is something like 6 a.m. your time, so I appreciate you taking this time. But I understand you went to a subreddit and you posted about Zettelkasten, and then the responses were quite severe, and in particular, responding to your use of Notion vis-a-vis Rome or personal digital system. So can you describe what you learned?
Look, if you're a new writer, don't go to Reddit. I'm just warning you. Or go to the Notion Reddit. Don't go to the places where other people hang out. I think that there is it's an unhealthy obsession with tools. There's, all these Notion nerds, there's Rome cult, there's Obsidian, there's all of this. And, and it's funny that now I do have some things in Rome and I've got my head around it, but I built my whole system in Notion and it works. And I've sold, 100 people out there also think it works because they bought the same thing and they're using the same product. So I think that it's the tool, you can make the tools work, and you should make whatever tools that you like to use work. And so I've used it for a long time for my Zettelkasten, but I did have a lot of backlash, and it was in the early days of creating. And so it's lucky that the Notion community are so lovely, because I just hopped back over there and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm getting annihilated by all these people. But people still say it to me now. No, Rome is so much better for Zettelkasten, and you can link things and all of that. I'm like, it's not better if you don't like to use the tool or if you don't understand the tool. And so now I'm bringing a lot of what I learned in Notion about how that process works. Notion is great at kind of visualizing your process. Rome is great at kind of a little more friction free. But the problem is in Rome, if you do not know your system, it will still be a chaotic mess and you won't be able to find anything. So actually, Notion helped me understand what my process was, and then now I can kind of make that happen in Rome. And so now I'm bringing the two communities together.
Yeah, you may be the first person to marry the two.
I know.
Well, I have a quote that's on my mind. I'll read it to you, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. And then I'm going to ask a follow-up about the ecosystem of products that you're building and bringing forward, which they're impressively different from one another. And I'll talk about that when we go through them. But here's the quote. It's from a gentleman named Gregory Orr. He says, Emerson says there's creative reading as well as creative writing. Gather together all the poems and fragments that have shaken your spirit and sustained it. Create your own Bibles. That's a job we have, it seems to me.
Oh, yeah, that is so cool. I think, I see consuming now as like an active participation. And so I love the idea of creative reading or creative consuming. And I do think that there's so many things to consume. And I think it can be overwhelming, but if you can kind of bring that together and be an active participant in it, rather than just well, I'm just scrolling the internet, or I've got 100 tabs open, or that kind of thing. I think it's intention. Intention is a really big theme for me. About reading with intention, taking notes with intention. Yeah,
I agree. And the author that I mentioned in our previous conversation, Robert Darnton, who wrote a terrific long-form piece called Extraordinary Commonplaces, I think published in around 2001 or something. It's available in the New York Review of Books online, in front of the paywall, I believe. In any event, he said that this sort of thing that you're describing is nothing more than reading for action. And I just love that phrase. And you could broaden it to say consuming for action if you're listening to podcasts like this one.
Yeah.
And it just reminds me of this other quote. When reading authors, if you find bright passages which strike the mind, be not contented with the sight, but put them down in black and white. Edward
Love it.
Bracken.
I love it. Yeah. And I think, as well as like I still have like a quote database as well as like then putting things into my own words. Because I do think there's something magical about a really good piece of writing and how someone worded it and that kind of thing. And that's just that's the writer coming out of me.
Yes. Well, it's evident and clear in how you're sort of casting yourself online these days. It's really great. And I am understanding that just even, in the past few days, you're bringing new things out there. Consumer to Creator, which is a Rome research course, I believe, and I'd love for you to describe that. Your daily creator book, and there's a whole host of other Gumroad products. So I would just like how do they all fit together, and describe the ones that are sort of top of mind for you.
Yeah, I am not sure that they fit together, except that they fit together in my interests and what I do. So, and I kind of see the thread. So the first thing I ever created was Consumer to Creator Lab, which is a Notion template and workshop. And people were just asking me, what's my system? What do I use? How do I generate so many ideas? And so I was like, well, here it is. And so that's been for me, that's kind of, I would say, my flagship product up until now. I also wrote a lot about experiments in my first 30 days of writing. I do these 30-day life experiment on myself. And so I had a lot of writing and I wanted to see if I could create that into something like a guide. So I created a 30-day guide in Notion with kind of a template attached so that you were learning at the same time as you were experimenting on yourself. And then from there, I just did a live workshop with people on how to actually create Notion products. Because I think even if you don't use Notion as your kind of daily driver of productivity or notes or anything, it's actually a great place for creators to create products, really cool products, like different products where, it's not just, let's say you're writing a book, you might like in a Word doc, you can have words. That's it. It's like a Word doc. But in Notion, you can include multimedia and videos and podcasts. And so in my guide, it's got all of that. I've got videos that I pulled in. I've got a podcast that, I was listening to. And so I think all of that makes it a really immersive experience. And so I did a workshop and it's still available. People still kind of download and watch the replay. And so, a lot of my products kind of revolved around that. I haven't actually launched in a long time. I just launched my Focus Hub, which is like my task management, project management system. And so a lot of the time, I'm always better when I'm building. Like when I'm learning stuff, when I'm kind of creating things, when I'm in the process, I always find I have more ideas, I share more, that kind of thing. So so that's kind of a lot of it is Notion. And then I've been experimenting with Rome. I've been fascinated with Rome, but I wasn't able to understand it. I tried Rome Book Club, I was a failure at it. And so then it wasn't until I thought, well, actually, I'd love to get back into journaling. And so I started to use it for journaling. And then that actually helped me to understand the tool in a really simple way. And so then I thought, well, I've got this Consumer to Creator Lab. People love it in Notion, but there's also other people who use other tools. And I realized that it's not actually tool based. It's a concept. And so now I want to try and bring that concept into more of a course that you can apply in Rome or in Obsidian or in whatever you do. And I feel like that's probably kind of my next step. And then I got this book and I just got ideas. And that's what I do. I put the ideas out and I'm like, okay. And actually I'm just addicted to launching things now. And Gumroad's made that like super easy.
Yeah, that's great. Good to hear. And you're not kidding, by the way, when you say that you really have turned into a creator. I think it's something like 150 essays. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so it's probably 150 essays, and then I'm coming up to 200 days of daily creating.
So wait, you're saying there's 150 essays in that time period in 200 days or so?
Yeah.
See, that's what will blow people's minds. And these are not just merely atomic essays in many cases, correct?
Yeah, so I'd create every day. That's my thing. I decided probably about 50 days ago it doesn't have to be an essay. So it could be a Medium article or a video or that kind of thing. So I have 200 pieces of pretty good content, I would think, in my words, on the internet. Yeah.
So when you say create every day, what you're really saying is publish something every day, launch something every day.
Yeah. Hit the publish button.
Because in my case, I do feel like I'm creating something every day, but I'm not publishing it every day. So there's the switch that I need to flip, I believe.
Maybe I should be the daily publisher rather than the daily creator. But no, but I think, I learned a lot. I learned some really good lessons, and all of this kind of started when I joined Ship 30. Before that, I was at a few blog posts out there, let's just say. But I learned, and I really got addicted to hitting that publish button, getting that feedback. And it's like this continuous loop of feedback, ideas. Like as you put ideas out there, people ask you questions, people add to it. Like yesterday or a couple of days ago, I put something out about my daily page, like as a scratch pad. And then one of my friends summarized it and made it even better. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to steal that for when I write it on Medium. So it's just there's a whole lot of feedback that happens when you hit publish every day. And so I never kind of see, a lot of the time we see our blog posts as like finished, done, complete. Okay. But for me, it's like a continuous loop. So I'll write an essay, and then like my book is all of my essays that I've ever written on being a creator. And I combine them all. It's about 12,000 words. And now I've got something to write. Like I don't have to start with a blank page.
Yeah, that's just a consistent well-mapped territory in terms of a process. Arvid Kahl has talked in great detail and entertainingly about how he has published his books. And it seems like you're mirroring that path to some extent. I have a question for you on the way you put things out there. I assume you're not doing it because you have such a sophisticated Zettelkasten at this point in serial nature, rather that you're doing many things in parallel. How many different pieces discrete pieces of content are you working on at any given time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a lot of people have like their one idea and they're trying to write that and then they write another one. I'm not like that. I just, if I have to be interested in it. And so one of the things that really attracted me to the Zettelkasten system is follow your interests. Like if you're not interested in something, put it down and do something else. And so that's how I've kind of done my creator life as well. So at the beginning of the week, I try and look through my ideas list. So atomic essays, I generally write on weekdays. And then on the weekends, I'll do a video or a Medium post or my newsletter. So I try and promote a whole lot of ideas that I think, oh yeah, that's interesting. How much brain dump have I done on that? Like how kind of advanced is the idea. And so I'll move them all into my up next pile. And so it's like if I had something on my desk, like just sitting there, like, okay, that's my up next pile. I'm working on that. So, and during the week, I might jump into one and write a little bit. Sometimes I have like 250 words. It's not a heap of words. So like sometimes I'll just have written the whole essay in my brain dump and I'll just clean it up. And so, so I'm probably working on about 5 atomic essays at a time, like in a week. And then Medium articles, I'm probably working on 1 or 2, but they are not from scratch. Like I'm taking content I already have and just like mixing it up. And then I'm trying to write more Twitter threads, but it's tough. Twitter threads are the toughest thing. Like I feel like I'm great at writing atomic essays and I can write them really quickly. But Twitter threads are on a different level as a writer.
I'm glad to hear you say that, Ev, because I have written my fair share and it is painful to say the least.
It is, isn't it? I honestly think it's just a different mind frame to get in. I haven't mastered the process, but I'm committed to it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to write some more Twitter threads.
I have a question for you because I think people at this point in the interview, if they've been listening closely, would be surprised to find out that you do this part time. In other words, you have a full time job.
I do.
And I've been thinking recently because I am creating on the side, I have a part time role here at Gumroad and several other part time roles in other enterprises. And it's very difficult, I think, for creators who are active and ambitious or aspirational in some way, not to allow your day job to crowd out those creative impulses. On the other hand, it's also difficult to make sure that you give a good faith effort at your full-time and part-time roles. And so the interchange or interplay between those two things, I would love to hear you reflect on. How do you make sure you're doing a great job at your job and a great job with what you love creatively?
It's a good question. I mean, I work in marketing, so the I always see my creator role as fueling fueling that. So a lot of the things that I learn, I can then go and kind of use in my marketing role. But I think for me, having good processes and good systems around is key for me. I and when I'm in my day job, I'm in my day job. I'm like fully focused and that's what I'm doing. And then outside of that, I then create hours. And so like the morning time for me is big. Like, I get up at 5, I do writing, I create, I do all of that. I'm freshest in the morning. And so I find that also it's energy giving for me. And so that actually fuels going into your job because you've done like something that, not that you don't enjoy your job, but like you've done something that really brings you energy in the morning. And so then that kind of fuels you for the rest of the day. I find I'm not very alive at night. So obviously I'm up really early. So I tend to do more engagement at night. So I'll sit on Twitter and reply and, that kind of thing. And then but also you got to find ways to make it fast. Like if you're spending, weeks writing your medium essay, that's not like you're not going to be able to really push things out. So even if you have to like make things smaller, like atomic essays, easy for me to write every day. And I've got a process. I have an hour. That's it. If it's not good or if I'm not ready, I still hit publish. Like, Dickie and Cole just said, just hit publish, even if you don't love it. Like, so, and, when you have 150 essays out there, you have permission to write a few, not great ones.
Do you find yourself referencing your old atomic essays while you're writing the new ones and just using that, as I said before, as an input?
Sometimes, but actually, I went back through some of my older ones on the weekend and I was like, oh, these are so good. Like some you just forget. And I was like, okay, I need to find a way to bring some of these back up. Like I know some of my friends, they've got like Hype Fury and they're retweeting and I'm actually not that sophisticated. Like people think I'm organized and systemized, but actually I don't do some of those like really basic things, but I do love to jump back in. So like, we've got a new cohort coming up of Ship 30. And so I'll get some of my best kind of creative like ideas around creating and I'll create a little thread for day one just to give people inspiration. So I do stuff like that and I want to do more of like bringing up some of the older ones.
Let me ask you about a contrarian idea I think you have. There's a lot of talk about productivity on the internet, and it can take on a life of its own in the sense that you need to do more, and that sort of a thing. And you've been pushing back on that. And you say humans are designed for energy and flow. Can you further define that for me?
Yeah, I think productivity gets a bad rap these days, and maybe that's because we've associated with hustle. But I think that you should love your life. Like, I don't want to be more productive so that I can do more work. I want to be more productive so I can actually save time and do less work and enjoy kind of the time I have. But we had this conversation yesterday on Twitter, is that we we don't know how to live with space in our lives because we've filled it with so many things for so long. And so actually sometimes this is how people kind of burn out, is they do get more productive, but then they have more space. And so then they fill that space with more things. And so I think that's where kind of the burnout comes from. And I think a lot of people start to realize that what was important, like, and, that it's okay to slow down, or it's okay to, enjoy some time with your family and stuff like that. So I think for me, it's all about being present in the moment. So I tend to do a lot of systems and processes so that I do the thinking before I do the doing. And so when I'm like actually taking action, I'm in the moment and I'm fully present. And yeah, so I'm all about like, you know, like, yeah, finding flow and getting energy from what I do.
Well, I can't believe that we have approached our time limit here in this conversation yet again, very fast, it seems. It's been such a refreshing conversation, and I think it will resonate most with people who you have sort of self-described consumer to creator, people who are really maybe feeling stuck in some form or fashion and want to activate that creative aspect to themselves. So I want to afford you the opportunity to talk, if you want, further about the Focus Hub, and then sort of where people can find you as we sign off.
Yeah. The Focus Hub is my latest product, and I'm really proud of it because and if you do want to do less, and actually a big part of the Focus Hub is working in these cycles, but not just like, you know, not just like Pomodoro or anything like that. It's actually just being really truthful with yourself about how much time you actually have and how much capacity you have. And so a lot of people are realizing, okay, I overschedule myself way too much. And so it's about like, yeah, being honest with how much time you have and how much you can fit into that. And so yeah, it's really fun. If you want to check it out, you can just go to my website, evchapman.com, or reach out to me on Twitter and I can get you all the details. It's really, I've had some really great feedback from it.
Share your Twitter handle.
Yeah, so Evelyn, EVIELYNC is my Twitter handle. I feel like I need to change it now because spelling of my name is so different. But yeah, reach out to me. I love DMs. I love to have conversations with other creators.
Well, while you're having your morning coffee, I'm going to leave you with a quote, since it's so early there. This is from Seneca the Younger. We also, I say, ought to copy the bees and sift whatever we have gathered from a varied course of reading. Even though it betrays its origin, yet it nevertheless is clearly a different thing from whence it came. I love that quote because it talks about just putting your own stamp on the information you consume, and you have been the embodiment of moving from that consumption to creation and making it your own. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Justin. This is really fun.
Talk soon.